Imagine you are a janitor in a big company, but are often ridiculed and looked down upon by the leaders. The janitor in this story was like that, but she secretly made a plan. What is her plan? Will she succeed in taking revenge, or will she be looked down upon again? Welcome to TH Voices of the Underdog, where the stories of the overlooked emerge. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell for more. Sophia Grant had always been surrounded by luxury. From the time she could remember, her life was one of privilege. She had never needed to worry about anything: the best education, the most prestigious social circles, and a future carefully mapped out for her as the heir to the empire built by her father, Jonathan Grant. Jonathan was the founder and CEO of Grant Enterprises, one of the most influential companies in the industry. He was a man who had weathered the storms of business to establish a global empire, and he expected nothing less from his daughter. But Sophia wasn't sure if that was the future she wanted. For years, Sophia had been groomed to follow in her father's footsteps. She had been taught the boardroom speeches, the strategies, and even how to lead, but something was missing. She had never truly understood the pulse of the company, the struggles, and the real dynamics of the workplace. Her father's world was one of polished floors, mahogany desks, and executive meetings. But the people who kept the company running, the ones who did the real work, the janitors, the assistants, the drivers, what was their world like? She could only guess. This question gnawed at her more and more as she grew older. Sophia knew how to lead from behind a desk, but how could she lead if she didn't know what it was like to truly be in the trenches? She couldn't just accept the legacy that had been handed to her without understanding the heart of the business. That's when an idea began to form in her mind, one so daring and mysterious that even she wasn't sure she could pull it off. It was a Thursday morning when Sophia made the decision. As she prepared for her usual day of meetings with her father's advisors, something shifted within her. She told her father she would be spending the day in the company, observing the staff, gathering feedback on how things were going. What he didn't know, however, was that she planned to enter the company not as the CEO's daughter, but as a janitor. Sophia had a plan. She knew the logistics of the company inside and out, having been brought up around it her whole life. She had a team of advisors and even personal assistants to help her with any task, but none of them would be accompanying her today. Today, she was on her own. She disguised herself as one of the maintenance staff. Donning a janitor's uniform, with her hair tied up and hidden under a cap, Sophia took on the role of someone who didn't belong in the glossy world of boardrooms and high-level meetings. She blended into the world of the unnoticed, those who cleaned the offices, emptied the trash bins, and kept everything running behind the scenes. As she made her way through the company's pristine hallways, she felt an overwhelming sense of curiosity and anticipation. She had been inside this building hundreds of times, but now, as she walked through the back entrance, it felt foreign, even alien. The bright lights of the office space were dimmer in this part of the building, and the air smelled different, less of coffee and polished wood, more of industrial cleaners and the sterile scent of maintenance supplies. Sophia's first task was to clean the bathrooms on the lower floors, and she had no illusions about the grunt work awaiting her. She was aware that the real world inside the company was far different from the one she had been shown as the daughter of the CEO. Her heart raced with a mix of excitement and nervousness as she began to scrub the mirrors and mop the floors. It was there, in the quiet hum of cleaning supplies and fluorescent lights, that Sophia first observed the unspoken rules of the office. The dynamics she had never paid attention to before, how people interacted with one another, how some were treated with respect and others with indifference, began to unfold before her eyes. It didn't take long for her to spot the first sign of something off. A few floors up, as she moved to clean the finance department, she was introduced to Carter Hayes, the finance director. Carter was an imposing figure, known for his sharp suits, his authoritative voice and his cold, calculating demeanor. He was a senior executive, someone who had been with the company for years and had a reputation for both brilliance and ruthlessness. From the moment their paths crossed, Sophia could feel the disdain radiating off him. It started subtly, with a dismissive look as she passed him on her way to the supply closet. Carter didn't acknowledge her at first, but that wasn't unusual in a company where workers of all ranks were often treated as invisible by those in positions of power. But as the day wore on, the encounters with Carter became more frequent and more uncomfortable. Sophia caught him watching her as she cleaned the conference room, his eyes narrowed, clearly assessing her. She had learned to block out the disapproving stares and whispers of office workers, but Carter was different. There was an arrogance in the way he looked at her, as though she were beneath him, just another cog in the machine. Then, without warning, he spoke. "You're cleaning here, huh?" "Must be tough," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're not used to this, are you? Not quite the corporate lifestyle you're used to." His tone was condescending, as if he could somehow tell who she really was, even though she had gone to great lengths to keep her identity concealed. Sophia's eyes narrowed, but she kept her voice steady. "Just doing my job," she replied, keeping her head down as she continued to mop the floor. Carter smirked, walking away without another word. But Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that he had been testing her, probing her reaction. She could almost hear the undercurrent of his thoughts, judging her, sizing her up. As the day went on, Carter's behavior escalated. He would stand near her while she worked, making small comments, belittling her in subtle ways. "You missed a spot," he would say. "Try to keep up, huh?" His words were like daggers, each one designed to chip away at her dignity. Sophia could feel the tension building inside her, but she held herself together. This was why she was here. She wasn't just a spectator. She was here to understand the power dynamics, the way people like Carter treated those they saw as inferior. What she didn't know was that her day of observation would take a dark turn. The next time she encountered Carter, he was standing at the elevator, chatting with a colleague. When he noticed her walking by, he made a pointed remark loud enough for her to hear. "Maybe you should stick to your kind of work. You know where you belong." His colleague laughed, and Carter's smirk deepened. It was obvious to Sophia that Carter had a deep-seated belief in his own superiority, and it didn't matter that she was working for the company or the same people he worked with. In his eyes, she was just a janitor, nothing more. The comments became a daily ritual. Carter would deliberately make her work harder than she should, assigning her tasks that didn't belong in her scope. He'd leave his coffee cup on the floor just to make her pick it up. Sometimes, he'd even knock things off his desk, watching her as she cleaned up his messes. It was clear he was trying to assert his dominance over her in any way he could. Sophia was furious. She could feel the frustration building with each passing day. But what struck her most wasn't the harassment itself. It was how few people in the office seemed to notice, or if they did, how few were willing to speak up. There was a quiet, unsettling apathy in the air. The few people who did acknowledge her presence were either indifferent or too afraid to say anything. It wasn't just Carter who was at fault. The entire atmosphere of the company, at least from what she could see, was one of silent acquiescence. Power was hoarded at the top, and the rest of the employees were left to fend for themselves, often invisible and powerless. But Sophia refused to be like everyone else. She knew she couldn't let the mistreatment go on, and she knew that if she ever hoped to lead this company, she needed to understand how to fight against such toxicity. What she didn't realize at that moment was that her quest for truth would uncover something much bigger than she ever anticipated, a darkness that ran far deeper than the actions of a single man. Sophia's days of quietly observing were about to come to an end. The wheels had been set in motion. What would happen next would shake the foundations of Grant Enterprises, but Sophia was ready. She would be the one to expose the truth. The only question was, could she handle the consequences of what she was about to uncover? Each day, the heavy weight of Carter Hayes's disdain pressed down on Sophia Grant. What began as subtle jabs soon transformed into a full-on campaign of humiliation. From the moment she clocked in, Carter seemed to be on a mission to remind her of her supposed inferiority. At first, Sophia had tried to brush off his comments, the cold stares, and the increasingly demeaning tasks he assigned to her. But with each passing day, the emotional toll grew heavier, and it was becoming harder to ignore. Sophia's job as a janitor was already grueling enough. Cleaning up after people who ignored her presence, brushing aside the crumbs of a corporate life she'd never truly known. It was humbling, exhausting work. Yet, what she wasn't prepared for was the humiliation that came from the likes of Carter Hayes, a man who held the title of finance director but wielded his power over her like a cruel game. It seemed as if no matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. Carter was relentless. The first week had been rough, but by the second week, it had taken a darker turn. The comments, once dismissive, had become outright mockery. Sophia had learned to keep her head down, to focus on her tasks, but Carter seemed to make it his personal mission to disrupt her, to make her feel small. One particularly awkward morning, as she was polishing the glass tables in the meeting room, Carter had sauntered in, coffee cup in hand, his presence filling the space with an air of arrogance. "Ah, just the person I was looking for," he said, not even acknowledging her work or her presence. He took a seat in one of the chairs at the center of the room, his gaze cool and calculating. "I need you to clean this chair," he commanded, pointing at the seat he had just occupied. Sophia's brow furrowed in confusion. He was sitting in the chair. He expected her to clean it while he remained there. I don't understand," Sophia stammered, fighting the urge to stand up for herself. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the request. But before she could say more, Carter interrupted. "I said clean it. I don't want to see any dust on it. I like things spotless," he said, his voice dripping with venom. His eyes locked onto hers as if daring her to defy him. Sophia's heart raced as she processed the absurdity of the situation. She had cleaned countless chairs in this room before, but never while someone was sitting in them. She stood there, frozen for a moment, her mouth dry. The insult hung in the air like a bad smell, but she couldn't back down. Not now. Not anymore. Swallowing her pride, she nodded and began her task, her hand trembling slightly as she picked up the cloth and wiped down the chair where Carter was sitting. Every motion felt like a violation, every stroke of the cloth on the chair a reminder of just how much he despised her. Sophia's patience was reaching its breaking point. It was becoming increasingly clear that Carter's cruelty wasn't just a random occurrence. It was a pattern. And it wasn't just him. The general apathy of the staff to her situation was just as troubling. But there was one person who wasn't content to sit quietly in the background. Lucas Ramirez, a senior employee in the marketing department, had watched the events unfold from a distance, and it was clear he wasn't one to tolerate injustice. He had seen Carter's treatment of Sophia before. He'd overheard the snide comments and witnessed the demeaning tasks that were shoved her way. But when he saw Carter ordering Sophia to clean the chair while he sat in it, something inside him snapped. Lucas had always been the type to stay out of office drama, a quiet man who did his job without fanfare, but he couldn't ignore the blatant disrespect anymore. He had been raised to stand up for what was right, and seeing Sophia, a woman of dignity, being treated like this was too much. He approached Sophia quietly as she continued to clean the chair under Carter's watchful eye. "You don't have to take this," he said in a low voice, just loud enough for her to hear. "You're better than this." Sophia glanced up at him, surprised by the sudden support. She had been so used to enduring Carter's cruelty in silence that it felt foreign to hear someone speak up for her. She shook her head, a mixture of frustration and helplessness on her face. "It's fine. It's my job," she muttered, though the words tasted bitter in her mouth. She wanted to stand up for herself, but how could she in this situation? Lucas frowned, shaking his head. He couldn't let this go on any longer. "No, it's not fine. You deserve better than this," he said firmly, his voice rising slightly. Carter, who had been watching the interaction with a smirk, stood up suddenly, his eyes narrowing at Lucas. "What's this?" he sneered. "Are you giving her advice now, Lucas? How sweet." Lucas held his ground, not intimidated by Carter's sharp gaze. "I don't think it's right for anyone to be treated like this, especially not someone who works hard, no matter their position." Carter's eyes flashed with anger, his lips curling into a mock smile. "Who do you think you are, lecturing me?" His tone turned colder, more dangerous. "I could have you out of here in a second. Don't forget your place, Lucas." There it was, the threat, the ugly, silent power play. Carter's face darkened, and for a moment the room seemed to shrink, the tension palpable. Lucas felt his blood pressure rise, but he didn't flinch. "I'll remind you, Carter," Lucas said, standing tall, "that people like you can't stay at the top forever. The truth always comes out." The room went quiet. Carter's lips tightened into a thin line, but the tension didn't break. It was clear to everyone present that Lucas was taking a stand. He wasn't afraid, but neither was he oblivious to the dangers of defying someone with Carter's position and power. The confrontation hung in the air for several seconds, and then Carter broke the silence with a low laugh, as though the entire situation was amusing to him. "You're delusional if you think anyone will listen to you, Lucas," he sneered. Without another word, Carter stormed out of the room, leaving a bitter silence in his wake. But Lucas didn't back down. He turned to Sophia, his face softening. "Don't let him get to you. We're all watching, and we'll find a way to make things right." Sophia stared at him, surprised and grateful. She had never imagined that someone would speak up for her, much less challenge someone like Carter. But Lucas wasn't done. He knew that in order to bring about any real change, he would have to gather evidence to expose Carter for what he was. Over the next few days, Lucas started to pay closer attention to Carter's actions. He began to collect small pieces of evidence, photographs of Carter mistreating employees, documents showing discrepancies in financial reports, even small audio recordings of the director's offhand remarks. It was dangerous work, but Lucas didn't care. He knew that if he could gather enough proof, he could bring Carter down. But as he prepared his case, Lucas realized something even more troubling. Carter's abuse of power wasn't just isolated to Sophia. It was part of a larger pattern. Carter was running an empire of fear within the company, and it seemed like no one was safe. What started as a desire to help Sophia had quickly escalated into something far more complex. Lucas wasn't just standing up for her anymore. He was standing up against a toxic system, one that had corrupted everything it touched, and he would not stop until the truth was exposed. The rising tension between Lucas and Carter was only the beginning. What would happen next would set the stage for a conflict that could change the fate of the entire company. The only question left was how far Lucas and Sophia were willing to go to bring Carter's reign of terror to an end. It had been a long week of constant tension between Carter Hayes and Sophia Grant. Despite her growing frustration, she had been determined to keep her head down, to endure the humiliation in silence. She knew that revealing her true identity too soon could jeopardize her plan to gain insight into the company's inner workings. But every day, as Carter's cruelty increased, so did her inner turmoil. Sophia had hoped things might improve. Perhaps with time the harassment would slow down, or maybe Carter would lose interest in making her life a living hell. But that hope had quickly faded. Instead of lightening up, the pressure had only intensified. His need to humiliate her seemed insatiable, and each day he found new ways to assert his control over her. It was on one particularly grueling morning that the situation escalated beyond anything she had experienced before. Sophia was assigned to clean the meeting room once again, a task she had performed numerous times without incident. She had learned to approach it with a sense of quiet resignation, but this time, something felt different. As she entered the room, she noticed Carter standing by the door, his arms crossed over his chest in that familiar posture of smug authority. There was no hint of the usual casual indifference that marked his behavior. Instead, there was something colder in his eyes, something that made the hairs on the back of Sophia's neck stand on end. "Good morning, Sophia," Carter greeted her with an unsettling smirk. "Today, you'll clean under my supervision. I want to make sure you do it properly." Sophia's pulse quickened, and she had to force herself to keep her composure. The last thing she wanted was to appear nervous or intimidated. But there was something in Carter's tone that made her uneasy. She stepped into the room and began her work, moving to the corner near the windows to begin wiping down the dusty shelves. However, as she did, she felt the distinct click of the door locking behind her. She froze, her heart dropping in her chest. "Did you just lock the door?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound calm. Carter chuckled lowly. "What, afraid of a little confrontation? Don't worry, you'll be fine. Just focus on the cleaning and maybe we'll get through this session without any interruptions." Sophia felt a cold sweat break out on her skin. She was trapped with no way out. Carter's grin widened and the air between them grew thick with tension. Now, let's make sure this place is spotless. I expect nothing less than perfection from you," Carter said, watching her closely as she continued her work. His gaze was oppressive, making it difficult for Sophia to focus. The room felt smaller with every passing second, and she could feel his eyes following her every move. It wasn't long before Carter's presence became unbearable. His comments, always veiled in mock politeness, cut deep. He sneered as she polished the desk, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Try not to miss a spot, Sophia. We wouldn't want you to disappoint anyone," he taunted, leaning back in the chair, his posture lazy and cruel. Sophia gritted her teeth, focusing on the task at hand. But every time she glanced at Carter, his smirk seemed to widen. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was enjoying the control he had over her in this moment, enjoying her discomfort. As the minutes dragged on, Sophia grew more anxious. She couldn't stand the suffocating atmosphere any longer, but there was nothing she could do. She had no escape. It was only a matter of time before the harassment went too far, and she would be forced to act. Just as she was about to lose herself in her anxiety, there was a sudden commotion at the door. "Is everything all right in there?" a voice called out from the other side. It was Lucas. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. Lucas had been watching out for her, keeping a close eye on the escalating situation, and it seemed like today was no exception. He had been the only one to show any genuine concern for her well-being, but this was different. He had come to her rescue. Before Sophia could respond, the sound of banging on the door filled the room. Lucas and a few other employees, including Amanda and Julian, had gathered outside. They had heard the commotion, and Lucas had refused to let Sophia suffer in silence any longer. In a quick, decisive move, Lucas kicked the door open and the group rushed in. The sight of Carter, reclining in his chair while Sophia stood, visibly tense in front of him, was a moment frozen in time. The tension in the room was palpable, and for a split second, no one moved. "What's going on here?" Amanda demanded, her voice sharp with indignation as she took in the scene before her. She shot a look at Carter, her eyes narrowing in disbelief. Carter stood up abruptly, his face contorting with anger. "This is none of your business, Amanda. Get out of here," he snapped, but his tone lacked the usual confidence. For the first time, there was an edge of panic in his voice. He was cornered, and it was clear that his carefully constructed facade of control was starting to crumble. But Lucas wasn't backing down. "What's going on here, Carter? What exactly are you doing to Sophia?" he asked, his voice low and determined. Sophia, feeling the surge of support from her colleagues, finally allowed herself to speak. "He locked the door and made me clean under his watch," she said quietly, her voice trembling but filled with an undeniable strength. "He's been doing this to me every day, humiliating me, making me feel worthless." There was a stunned silence before Amanda spoke again, her tone firm. "We need to get this on record. We can't let this go on any longer." It was then that Julian, who had been quietly observing, pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly, and within seconds, he had started recording the entire scene. Carter's face twisted in fury as he realized what was happening, but it was too late. The evidence had been captured. The moment his harassment was laid bare was now immortalized on video. "Stop filming," Carter yelled, his face turning red with rage, but his protests fell on deaf ears. "I think it's too late for that," Lucas said, his voice calm but unwavering. "The damage is done, Carter. You've been exposed." For the rest of the day, the tension at Grant Enterprises was palpable. As the video circulated, employees began to speak out. Some were afraid to publicly challenge Carter, but others, like Lucas, Amanda, and Julian, refused to stay silent. The video of Carter's harassment spread quickly, and before long, it reached the eyes of key individuals within the company. The backlash was swift. Carter's position as finance director became untenable. Despite his attempts to deflect and deny, the evidence was irrefutable. His reputation, built on years of manipulation and cruelty, was in ruins. Meanwhile, Sophia's role in the company remained a mystery to most. She had not yet revealed her true identity, choosing to keep the facade of a low-ranking employee intact. But in the midst of the scandal, her patience had begun to pay off. With the video of Carter's misconduct spreading like wildfire, Sophia now held a powerful weapon in her hands, one that could change the course of her life, as well as the future of Grant Enterprises. But as the truth came to light, Sophia knew that this was only the beginning. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a glimmer of hope. Carter's reign of terror was coming to an end, and soon it would be time to reveal her true identity and take her place in the company, not as a victim, but as a force to be reckoned with. The morning of the big meeting was unusually tense. News of the viral video had spread throughout the company like wildfire, and with it, whispers of what was to come. Everyone had been talking about the video for days. The footage of Carter Hayes' cruel behavior, the locked door, the humiliation of Sophia Grant, and the shocking revelation of the power dynamics that had existed behind closed doors. But what none of the employees knew, not yet, was that the truth was about to come to light in a way none of them could have anticipated. Jonathan Grant, the CEO of Grant Enterprises, had called for an urgent meeting with the senior management team. He was the man everyone feared and respected, and his presence commanded authority in the boardroom. Yet even he couldn't escape the fallout of his own company's internal scandal. Sophia had remained quiet, her identity concealed as a janitor, but today was the day it would all change. Today, her true role in the company would be revealed, and Carter Hayes' reign of cruelty was about to come to an end. Sophia arrived early to the meeting room, dressed in a professional business suit, a stark contrast to the janitor's uniform she had been wearing for weeks. She looked around the room, the faces of her colleagues frozen in a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and unease. Some of them had recognized her, of course, but most had written her off as just another low-ranking employee doing their job. That perception was about to shift dramatically. As she sat down at the table, she could feel the weight of the moment. This was no longer about cleaning the floors or hiding in the shadows. This was about taking her place at the table. This was about claiming her rightful role as the future leader of Grant Enterprises. And this was about ensuring that the truth came to light, no matter the cost. The door opened, and Jonathan Grant entered the room with his usual commanding presence. His sharp eyes scanned the room, landing on Sophia for a brief moment before he took his seat at the head of the table. "Good morning, everyone," Jonathan began, his voice steady and authoritative. "I've called this meeting to address the recent events that have come to light regarding the actions of Mr. Carter Hayes. I know there's been a lot of speculation, but today, I want to ensure that the truth is made clear to all of you." The room fell silent as Jonathan paused for a moment, letting his words settle. He had a way of speaking that made everyone listen, and no one dared interrupt him. The tension was palpable as everyone waited to see what would come next. Jonathan gestured toward Sophia, his eyes briefly meeting hers with a subtle nod of recognition. "Before we proceed," he said, his voice firm, "I'd like to introduce someone you all know, but not in the way you might think. This is my daughter, Sophia Grant. She has been working within the company under the guise of an ordinary employee, and today, she will no longer remain in the shadows." At that moment, the entire room seemed to gasp in unison. Whispers broke out among the employees, and many of them looked at Sophia in disbelief. Carter Hayes, seated at the far end of the table, visibly stiffened, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process what was happening. His hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white with tension. Sophia, for the first time in weeks, allowed herself to stand tall. The weight of her family name, her position as the future CEO, and the responsibility that came with it all settled on her shoulders. This was her moment. "Wait a minute," Carter stammered, his face draining of color as he looked between Jonathan and Sophia. You're the CEO's daughter. He faltered, his voice tripping over the words as if the realization was too much for him to comprehend. I didn't know. How could I have known?" Sophia met his gaze evenly, refusing to show any sign of weakness. She had been subjected to his cruelty for far too long, but now everything had changed. Now she was in control. "Yes, Carter," she said coolly, her voice unwavering. "I'm Sophia Grant, and I've been here the whole time watching everything you did. And now, it's time for you to face the consequences." Carter's face twisted with disbelief and outrage. He glanced around the room at the other senior employees, most of whom had already caught on to the situation. He could feel the walls closing in on him, and his usual confidence was nowhere to be found. His eyes flicked nervously to Jonathan, who was watching him with an expression of quiet disappointment. "I don't know what you think you're doing, Sophia, but you've made a huge mistake," Carter spat, his voice rising. "You can't just throw me under the bus like this. I've been with this company for years. You have no idea what I've done for this place." But Jonathan Grant, ever the steady hand in the storm, raised a hand to silence him. "No, Carter, you're the one who made a mistake. You've been abusing your power for far too long, thinking you could get away with it. But now the truth is out, and there's no escaping it." Sophia nodded in agreement, her face a picture of calm determination. "It's over, Carter. Your time here is finished." Jonathan then stood up and, without a word, motioned for his assistant to play the video. The room fell silent as the screen flickered to life. The footage, shot from a hidden camera by one of the employees, revealed the full extent of Carter's mistreatment of Sophia. It showed him belittling her, making demeaning demands, locking the door, and taunting her as she cleaned under his supervision. His cruelty, his arrogance, his complete disregard for the people around him. It was all there, laid bare for everyone to see. As the video played, Carter's face grew pale. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, unable to escape the mounting evidence of his actions. The room was filled with the sounds of gasps, murmurs, and shocked expressions as employees watched the video unfold. When the video ended, Jonathan Grant wasted no time. "I'm sure I don't need to explain what's going to happen next," he said, his voice cold and final. "Carter Hayes, you are no longer employed by Grant Enterprises. Effective immediately, your position as finance director is terminated." Carter looked around the room, his expression one of disbelief and rage. "You can't do this. You'll regret this." "I have connections. I'll make sure you all pay for this." His threats fell on deaf ears as the truth continued to settle in. Sophia remained composed, her gaze unwavering as she addressed the room. "This is a lesson for all of us," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. "No one is above accountability. No one should be allowed to abuse their position for personal gain or to hurt others. This company will change, and we will create a workplace where respect and integrity are at the core of everything we do." The room was silent as everyone processed her words. Then, one by one, employees began to nod, their expressions shifting from doubt to admiration. Lucas, who had been sitting quietly beside Sophia, gave her a small, proud smile. He had been the first to stand up for her, and now he could see that his trust in her had been well placed. As the meeting came to an end, Carter was escorted out of the building by security, his reputation in ruins. The employees who had once been too afraid to speak out now felt emboldened. They knew that things were about to change, and they had witnessed the power of truth in the most unexpected way. Sophia Grant, the quiet janitor who had been overlooked and mistreated, was no longer invisible. She had proven herself, not just as the daughter of the CEO, but as a leader in her own right. With the support of people like Lucas, and with the backing of her father, Sophia was ready to take on the challenges ahead and steer Grant Enterprises toward a new, brighter future. As Jonathan Grant and Sophia walked out of the meeting room together, Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done well, Sophia. I'm proud of you." Sophia gave him a small smile. "Thank you, Dad, but this is just the beginning." The day after the explosive meeting, the halls of Grant Enterprises buzzed with a new energy, one that was both charged with anticipation and simmering with curiosity. The abrupt dismissal of Carter Hayes, the once feared finance director, reverberated throughout the company like a shockwave. News of his termination and the subsequent scandal surrounding his misconduct spread rapidly, and employees couldn't stop talking about the events that had unfolded the day before. For many, it was a breath of fresh air, a sign that the old ways of corporate manipulation and mistreatment were finally coming to an end. Sophia Grant, the young woman who had quietly walked the halls as a janitor only days before, had now become a symbol of change. Her actions had spoken louder than any boardroom speech could ever have, and as the company's future leader, she had proven that she was not just a figurehead, but a force to be reckoned with. Her decisive leadership had not only unmasked the corruption within Grant Enterprises, but had set in motion a wave of transformation that no one could ignore. Carter Hayes' termination was just the beginning. With his dismissal came an internal investigation into the financial misconduct that had been running rampant under his watch. Sophia, alongside her father, Jonathan Grant, had launched a comprehensive review of the company's financial records, determined to uncover any other discrepancies or unethical practices that might have been buried under Carter's influence. As expected, The investigation uncovered several discrepancies. It was clear that Carter had been involved in embezzlement, inflating financial reports, and manipulating company funds for his own benefit. His greed and abuse of power were not limited to his treatment of Sophia. They extended deep into the company's financial structures. As the investigation continued, more employees came forward with information about Carter's shady dealings, and the evidence mounted against him. For many, the discovery was shocking. They had trusted Carter, assuming his position as finance director meant he was a pillar of the company's integrity. Now, it was clear that he had been exploiting that trust for years. The fallout was swift. Several high-ranking executives who had been complicit in Carter's activities or had turned a blind eye to his actions were also removed from their positions. It was a purge, one that left the company reeling but ultimately purged of its most toxic elements. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of change. Sophia, with the support of her father, took swift action to reform Grant Enterprises. She held a series of meetings with employees from every department, listening to their concerns and ideas for how the company could become a better place to work. The mission was clear. Grant Enterprises would no longer operate on the principles of power and exploitation, but on those of fairness, transparency, and respect for all employees. One of the first steps in the overhaul was to create a more transparent system of communication. Employees were given an open forum to express their thoughts and concerns, and an anonymous whistleblower system was put in place to encourage honesty without fear of retaliation. Policies were rewritten, focusing on inclusivity, respect, and accountability. Promotions would no longer be based on favoritism or loyalty to corrupt figures but on merit and integrity. Sophia's vision was to turn the company into a model for corporate responsibility. She worked tirelessly, with Lucas and several other employees who had stood up for the truth, to rebuild the company culture. Those who had supported Sophia during the crisis, like Lucas, were promoted into key roles. His dedication to the company's values had not gone unnoticed, and he quickly became a trusted ally to Sophia in her mission to transform Grant Enterprises. It wasn't just the leadership that had to change. The employees themselves had to shift their mindset from one of fear and compliance to one of collaboration and mutual respect. There was no longer room for power games or office politics. The message was clear. Everyone had a voice, and everyone had a role to play in the company's success. As the company began to recover, the effects of Sophia's leadership spread beyond the walls of Grant Enterprises. News of the scandal, and of Sophia's decisive actions, made headlines. Industry leaders and the media praised her for taking a stand against corruption, and soon, other companies began to take notice. They saw the changes at Grant Enterprises and realized that there was a new model for success emerging, one built not on the backs of exploited employees, but on the foundation of fairness and accountability. Sophia's father, Jonathan, watched with pride as his daughter steered the company into a new era. He had always known she was capable of greatness, but he had never imagined she would rise to the occasion so quickly and so decisively. In the wake of the scandal, he knew that Grant Enterprises had been given a second chance, and it was his daughter who had made that possible. His trust in her had been unwavering, and now it was clear that she was the leader the company needed. As the months went by, the company's profits began to rise again. Employee morale improved, and there was a renewed sense of pride among the staff. They had weathered the storm together and emerged stronger on the other side. There were still challenges ahead, but Sophia had shown them that no matter how powerful an individual may be, no one is invincible if their actions are rooted in injustice. The final chapter of this story was not about the downfall of a single man, but about the rise of a new generation of leaders who were committed to making the world a better place. Sophia's leadership had shown that justice could be served, even in the most entrenched systems of power. She had taken a stand against oppression, and in doing so had created a legacy that would endure long after the scandal had faded from the headlines. At a company-wide event, Sophia stood before her employees, her voice steady and filled with purpose. "What we've done here," she said, "is just the beginning. We've proven that power should not be built on oppression, but on respect and fairness. Together, we've created a company where everyone has a seat at the table and no one is left behind." The applause that followed was deafening. For the first time in years, Grant Enterprises felt like a place of opportunity, not just for the few at the top, but for everyone who walked through its doors. Sophia Grant had become more than just the daughter of the CEO. She had become the architect of a new, fairer world, a world where the voices of the oppressed were heard and where justice was the ultimate currency. And with that, the story of Grant Enterprises, once a symbol of corruption and exploitation, had come full circle, transformed into a beacon of hope and integrity for the future. Sophia's final words echoed in the hearts of everyone in that room, and those who had been a part of this journey would carry the lessons of fairness, respect, and justice with them for the rest of their careers. Grant Enterprises was no longer just a company. It was a testament to the power of doing what was right, no matter the cost. The legacy of Carter Hayes was one of caution, a warning to those who thought they could rise by tearing others down. The legacy of Sophia Grant, however, would be one of hope, a message that true power was not about domination, but about lifting others up and creating a better world for all. The story of Grant Enterprises had not ended. It had only just begun.